because he's the connecting glue. Wherever he goes, he connects communities and invites people to write and publish with him. In fact, I myself was privileged to co-edit 2 books with him way back. So that's what I appreciate about Matt Meyer. And his leadership is global. A Pan-Africanist in his own right, who really understands Africa than some of us who were even born on the continent. A Pan-Africanist, a scholar, a community activist, everything you want to see to build peace and advance justice can be found in Matt Meyer. And most recently, his leadership, his global leadership, was affirmed this past December as he was elected as the Secretary General of the parent organization of PJSA, IPRA, the International Peace Research Association. So, and something, he has another title. He's my brother. But today we had a little issue because I introduced my other brother, Dr. Horejes, who's sitting next to him. And then something went on as we're trying to negotiate who's the first and the second brother. And I was standing in the middle. So today is a special privilege to be sitting at the same table, surrounded by my dear brothers in their own right as scholars, as peace activists. So my friend and brother, Matt Meyer.
Needless to say, the privilege is mine. The field of peace research and peace studies needs a change in our body politic. As recently elected Secretary General of PJSA's parent institution, IPRA, it has been an absolute privilege to travel and present at 4 out of 5 of our regional associations, which reach across this fragile yet resilient planet to include academics and practitioners from every field and discipline, from every walk of life. In Jakarta, Indonesia, we looked at alternative institution building from indigenous perspectives, just as we have done here this weekend. In Sao Paulo, Brazil, the youth of Latin America took to the fore. In Cape Town, South Africa, the burgeoning network of African peace builders met at the Nelson Mandela Gateway to Robben Island Prison, where he spent many of his 27 years remaining true to his commitment for the freedom of his people. South Africa's Deputy Minister of Culture, whose peace portfolio also includes a special emphasis on youth, stood with us in recommitting to the struggles for a more just world. Our organization is growing, just as the world around us seems to be devolving. So vigilance is necessary in meeting the challenges of today and tomorrow. The African Peace Research Association conference ended with a rousing presentation from South African former Member of Parliament Magdalene Munsami, who spoke of the xenophobia and the attacks on women and children, which have become too commonplace in a country so recently filled with great hope. The realization that while legal and political apartheid fell, but economic apartheid continues, simply led the assembled attendees to ponder, isn't economic apartheid, also known as capitalism, an urgent peace problem facing more than just South Africa? In Nepal, our colleagues contemplate a world between Gandhi and Mao, in more than simply the geographic sense. We work with great excitement to set up IPRA's first international administrative center in Kathmandu, led by young faculty and assisted by students in a voluntary effort to better coordinate IPRA's mailing lists, newsletters, listservs, website, projects, and publications. They are suited to do so, not only because of their expertise and their infectious energy, but because this ideological, theological, practical, and principled dialectic between Gandhi and Mao feeds their thoughts and actions in ways we need to better understand and replicate. Conversations at the Latin American Youth Camp, featuring participants from Colombia, Mexico, Honduras, Argentina, Brazil, and elsewhere, turned quickly to issues of principles and practice, how to respond to new waves of dictatorship, neo-fascism, extreme militarism, disintegrating peace processes, and environmental devastation from south to north of the Americas. One Costa Rican student leader raised a cautionary note about old notions of successes and failures. Though his country may be proclaimed a great example as a decades-long nation without an army, the fact is that country still has tremendous economic and political injustice, which has not been softened by the apparent pacifist miracle. Another cautionary note came to me from an older Indian scholar after a brief welcoming statement I made in South Africa. Why, he asked, did you not mention Gandhi even once in your welcoming presentation? He unhappily asked. Equally unhappily, I informed him that for me, Gandhi was not a mantra or a religion to be repeated like a deep breathing exercise. Later in my visit, I was pleased to spend time with Ila Gandhi, Mohandas' granddaughter, in preparation for community-based celebrations of the 150th anniversary. But while I am skeptical of the significance of the No to Racist Gandhi agitations, which have been present in several African countries, I do think deep criticism is inevitable. In true, the bigger they come, the harder they fall fashion, whenever we set ourselves up for failure by mythologizing the work of men, when we make great souls or saints out of our all too human leaders. This brings me full circle to this closing PJSA plenary. And the new era of peace studies, which I think we are birthing now, which we must have emerged from these critiques and conversations. The body politic of peace research must understand that a truly multicultural, fully diverse, and radical discipline requires more than even a council structure like IPRA's, which mandates gender parity and an emphasis on the global south. We require a global shift in practice, which breaks all binaries and includes all pronouns, sexualities, and identities. We also require an analysis which understands the importance of identity and the importance of not getting too stuck in identity, at least not the identity of individualistic self-definition. Justice must derive from the rights according to individuals within communities and within society as a whole. In true communal sense, we must put into full practice the essential goal of the feminist dictum, the personal is political. Only now, we must understand that the two-way dialectic of that phrase needs collective community and grassroots practice. We must not only be drawn to carefully respect individual difference, we must be poised to make institutional changes which reflect our radical consciousness and inclusiveness. This surely means looking at the issues of our different strengths and our abilities and our so-called disabilities. It means looking at languages, including American Sign Language and indigenous languages, often thought to be lost, and our need to have greater multilingual spaces to fully build among natural allies. It means looking at architecture and how our structures inhibit, exclude, or embrace a truly diverse grouping, looking to build strong bridges of justice. It means looking at the broadest definitions of our cultures, including the cultures of deafness and the still colonized cultures of those imprisoned and most oppressed by the US empire and its clients. That is why this PJSA closing plenary is, in my opinion, so vital and important for the entire IPRA network and the global peace research movement. We have here in person and in video some of the leading thinkers regarding the issues not yet fully integrated into our consciousness and our practice. We have here issues and interventions which must be at the forefront of our future conferences and upcoming struggles if we are to work hand in hand with new generations to move beyond yesterday's lessons to a new paradigm of peace with justice. I am excited to be here with you, ready to listen and learn at the edge of my seat as these visionaries are about to share their concerns. I pledge to take these comments to the international bodies which will discuss implementation of some of the ideas presented here. I look forward to working on this together with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt, for setting us on the path to a very fruitful conversation today. So, how will we proceed from this very inspiring and urging opening remarks? I will take a couple of minutes to share the context of how this closing plenary became a reality. And then I'll briefly introduce the panelists. And after that, I will sit comfortably in my chair and be a faithful timekeeper. You have their introductions written in the program, so I will not have to read everything that's written. But how did we get here today? Matt Meyer just urged us to develop radical consciousness and to remember that we need a radical global shift in the way we do peace and justice work. Therefore, this plenary not only seeks to provide a challenging and motivational send-off to a very successful weekend that we have all witnessed here, but also very much expects to kick off conversations, radical conversations, honest conversations, and actions which will spread throughout the field globally, as Mario just envisioned. This plenary emerged from a very robust conversation that we had last year at the membership meeting at Acadia University in Pennsylvania. And the outcome of that very strong conversation was a commitment, PJSA institutional commitment, to intentionally broaden engagement in courageous conversations around diversity and accessibility in our work. As a result, we created a Diversity and Accessibility Fund to support this commitment. We are very grateful indeed to PJSA board to all PGSA members and allies and friends and supporters who contributed and continue to contribute to this fund, hence making this closing plenary possible. We are indeed deeply grateful to Matt Meyer, Hector Vazquez, who's sitting at the end of the table, Dr. Thomas Horejes for their presence here, and for their willingness to inspire and model new conversations that advance inclusive peace and justice. These new conversations are long overdue. Hence, this closing plenary is a time for us to raise questions that demand and inspire courageous conversations and actions that will chart the course of a paradigm shift in our collective understanding and pursuit of peace and justice. Such a paradigm shift will open our eyes to complex human realities and community voices that we may have overlooked previously. Such a paradigm shift will hold each one of us accountable for our sometimes limiting conceptualization of peace and justice. Such a paradigm shift will place diversity and inclusion at the heart of our peace and justice research, activism, and teaching. Therefore, this closing plenary, I hope, is a stepping stone to the Peace and Justice Studies Association of the future, more inclusive, more accessible, with a vision of peace and justice that is more affirming of our intersecting multicultural journeys. As we engage with the panelists, let us lean into our individual journeys with the following questions. Questions such as, what do peace and justice mean to me? Another question could be, in what ways could I have overlooked the experiences of others who do not look like me? Others whose languages differ from my own. Others whose ways of knowing challenge my own perceptions and expectations. You can add to that list of questions. So who are the plenary speakers today? My other brother, Dr. Horejes, will be the concluding speaker. So let me introduce Hector first at the end of the table without reading. I met him yesterday and he impressed on me his passion for really delving into indigenous music to really help Mexican cultures in Mexico reclaim the power and the learning, the wisdom that come through indigenous music. And he's so passionate about this. This is what he's researching for his PhD dissertation. He's really an activist in his own right as he continues to press issues of music and language equity and challenging colonialism, whether at the border or elsewhere. He's really somebody to watch, an upcoming scholar and activist to keep your eyes on. And how about my brother, Dr. Thomas Horejes? You see why he's my brother? We have, curly hair, the physical resemblance, it's kind of obvious, right? Good, I'm glad you're laughing. That's good, it's a good spirit. We started our respective jobs at Gallaudet University on the same day, and we met each other running in the stairways, and we're still crossing paths and working together. He's really a student and an expert and activist of social justice in his own right, according to his writing. So he will be, yes, and so he will be sharing some of his own experiences as a deaf scholar of social justice, a deaf person who has had to figure out his way around our hearing world. what it takes him to get here, and where he envisions us to be able to go. Not sitting at the table, but really present amongst us is Ynestra King. She sent us her message through video. Many of you know him. I think she was one of the plenary speakers at one of the PGSA conferences. She is an ecofeminist writer, a teacher, an oral historian, and an activist. And she's a native of Selma, Alabama, where she first observed the practice of nonviolent resistance, which was to become a lifelong preoccupation for her. She is an originator of ecofeminism and co-founded Women and Life on Earth, and convened the very first ever ecofeminist gathering in 1980, which organized the anti-militarist Women's Pentagon Action, contributing to the ecology of peace encampment movements of the 1980s and 1990s. She's a scholar also in her own rights, and we'll be really privileged to learn from her video message as she really delves into issues around body politics and peace and accessibility for people, for instance, who are wheelchair-bound like herself. Many of you already know. So I'm going to sit down and let the more inspiring presenters begin to share their wisdom. We're going to begin with Hector, and then we'll go to King's video. We will conclude with Dr. Horejes. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon to everyone. First of all, I want to acknowledge that we're in the territories of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Dakota, Dene, Métis, and Ojibwe Cree nations. We are the homeland of in Treaty 1 territory, the ancestral and traditional homeland of Anishinaabe people. First of all, I want to thank Professor Matt Meyer for the invitation. We met in Colombia last July, and also I want to thank the committee, the Russian committee, to allow me the possibility to be there today here with you. Thank you very much to all the committee that put together this conference. So first of all, I'm going to look in my power. Okay. I'm reading a quote for Indigenous scholar Sandra Stiers. She said, "The only place from which any of us can write or speak with some degree of certainty is from the position of who we are in relation to what we know." I will start this discussion by locating myself in order to acknowledge the position from which I will be situating my ideas and approaches. This brief introduction of myself will allow me to create a background for my presentation. I am Mexican. I am born and raised in Naolinco, Veracruz, Mexico. Naolinco is a municipality with a population of approximately 10,000 people, and it is 1 hour away from Jalapa, the capital of my state. I'm an only child, and my parents are the first people in their families to complete higher education. Both of my parents are retired teachers. As far as I know, based on my parents' information, I have Caribbean, Spanish, and Indigenous ancestry. I'm the first musician in my family. From the age of 6, I have been involved in music making. At that time, I enrolled in a music education program sponsored by the University of Veracruz for children that had some level of talent. I believe that because of luck, I was selected for that program. Because how can you assess if someone has talent or lack of it in a 5-minute exam? This allowed me to access a very low-cost program sponsored by the University of Veracruz. I needed to travel every day from my hometown to the capital of my state to attend my music lessons for the following 16 years until I completed my undergrad program in music performance. Through my education journey, I was shaped and trained technically in terms of the skills with the instrument, mentally and even spiritually in the classical music tradition. I learned everything in terms of music making in the classic music tradition from my teachers and peers. I remember that from the very beginning of my music training, I was taught that classical music was the most refined and superior form of music expression. Most of our teachers were European, Mexicans who had studied in Europe, or Mexicans who had studied in Mexico with European teachers. In order to motivate us, our teachers used comments like, if you don't practice, you will be just a mariachi musician. I'm not here to teach mariachi musicians. And other comments along those lines. Of course, we did not want to be labeled as students who were not good enough to belong to the right music making. Thus, my peers and I will practice even more in order to avoid such critiques. In several ways, being raised in the music conservatory tradition and its cultural discourse ended up shaping our own ideas and beliefs. With this training, one might believe that musicians who did not work hard belong to a particular group of people who were engaged in less relevant and less sophisticated form of music. Before I moved to Canada in 2016 to start my PhD program, I had in mind that during my doctoral studies, I will address the need for classical music to be a public good in Mexico, particularly in the educational system, so that all children could have the chance to access classical music training. This was, of course, shaped by my own life journey. I thought that if classical music helped me to accomplish some of my goals in life, other people should have the same opportunity. A couple of months before I moved to Canada, I experienced an epiphany moment that changed not just my research topic for my doctoral studies, but my perception about reality. The story is the following. I went to a free concert talk given by a French horn player who was to perform as a soloist with the Oaxaca Symphony Orchestra. Oaxaca, a state located in the south of Mexico, is well known for its extraordinary community music band tradition, which can be traced from the middle of the 19th century. Most of these community bands are principally formed of indigenous people. During the pre-talk concert, the French horn player took questions from the audience. An older man wearing indigenous style clothing asking something specific regarding the role that the French horn has in the brass section of the orchestra. The old man explained that he played in a community band in his hometown, and that in his band there was an instrument that he inferred had the same role as the French horn has in the orchestra. Immediately, a lady in the audience laughed in a ridiculous way about what he said. She probably assumed that this man was saying nonsense. Because of her actions, the French horn player decided to take the microphone and, to her surprise, confirms as accurate what the older man had said. When the French horn player finished his explanation, everyone in the room applauded, and the lady who had laughed left the room. As previously stated, this pre-talk concert took place in the state of Oaxaca. Oaxaca is the state in Mexico with the highest percentage of population who identifies as indigenous. According to the National Council for Indigenous Population in Mexico census, done in 2015, almost 2,600,000 people, 65% of this total are from the state of Oaxaca, are indigenous. And from those, over 1,200,000 people speak an indigenous language. So here's like a picture for a quick talk. To put these numbers in the context of Canada, according to Statistics Canada, in 2016, almost 264,000 people spoke an indigenous language in the whole country. And then you have the graphic that shows how many people speak an indigenous language just in the state of Oaxaca. The experience of the pre-concert talk profoundly affected me because in some way it reminded me of the assumptions that were made during my schooling by music teachers and students about other forms of music making. And most importantly, I realized that we, as a society, nurture assumptions, hierarchies, and judgment regarding various musics and the bearers of those musics. Based on people's physical features, language, and clothes, we as a society assume that some people do not have something relevant to share. Although we could learn much from exploring the ways in which indigenous groups approach music and music learning, and more broadly about our indigenous heritage and cultures. Mexicans, as a collective, refuse to recognize and acknowledge the knowledge that indigenous peoples and communities have. Many Mexicans do not recognize that in refusing, they are denying a part of themselves because a large number of Mexicans are either indigenous or have indigenous ancestry. This ancestry is very much evident in our physical features. Nevertheless, we as a society kept ignoring that heritage because we want to escape the discrimination that has been placed among them for many centuries. Them because we go far. Since that experience, I have started thinking about how I could contribute to acknowledging and fostering appreciation towards music with indigenous roots and their bearers. I completely shifted my doctoral research project. Currently, I am creating a framework to embrace music with indigenous roots in Mexico's national educational system. My goal is that children can learn music with indigenous roots as a way to foster appreciation for indigenous cultures and their bearers. I strongly believe that education in Mexico should address the identities of over 26 million people that identify as indigenous in Mexico. It is crucial that new generations are properly informed about their ancestral heritage and foster a sense of pride instead of a fear of being discriminated for their indigenous heritage. In order to move forward towards appreciation of our local culture, it is necessary for us Mexicans to look in the mirror and acknowledge who we are. There has been a long history of discrimination and undervaluation of indigenous ways of knowing and our identities. It is important to acknowledge that the so-called other indigenous identity as part of who we are. Is it reasonable to expect that music and music education can change the assumptions that have been created over centuries? The short answer is no. Music by itself cannot make a significant change because there is a danger of merely tokenizing indigenous perspective by playing songs without the cultural background that is required to make music making a culturally significant experience for students. In the particular case of embracing music with indigenous roots in Mexico, I see educators as playing a key role in making a meaningful change to move to meaningful representation of indigenous cultures. Educators spend a significant amount of time with their students. Therefore, their modeling to actions is really important in order to show respect and appreciation towards indigenous ways of knowledge and their bearers. If students see that their teachers embrace indigenous perspectives with respect and appreciation, it is possible that students will follow the example. I acknowledge that it requires a lot of commitment from educators to overcome through their own practice a system that has been displaced to portray indigenous cultures and worldviews as something from the past, something that belongs to the books of history. but that do not represent indigenous perspective as something alive and vibrant. I believe that it is important to create bridges of communication between music culture bearers and educators in order to co-create culturally significant learning experience for students. During my research field work, I have heard that music culture bearers of some Huasteco, the music that I'm particularly studying right now, are not that interested, are more than interested in working side by side with educators. Nevertheless, there has not been a meaningful approach for educators to music culture bearers. For me, one of the reasons for this lack of collaboration is the general assumption that what indigenous cultures have to offer is not relevant for the current goals in education in Mexico and beyond. The current learning goals for education have been created not to attend the particular needs of a specific context, rather following prescribed guidelines established by international organizations such as the OECD, which aims to standardize learning outcomes that aligns with globalization. We in the so-called third world have been told that it's important to follow the recommendations of organizations such as the OECD and the World Bank, and to look on the global north if we want to move towards progress. Progress has been portrayed as mainly accomplished by creating more jobs in our countries in the global south. These at the cost of sacrificing our natural resources and health, so that multinational companies can explore and exploit natural resources in conditions that would not be accepted in the countries of origin of those multinational companies. I do not try to just blame the global north, as it has been also responsibility for not being able to eradicate the biggest challenge in Latin America, corruption. Corruption is at all levels. We have all experienced or participated in corruption at some point in our lives. And we have been told that this is the way that things work. And you either follow this path or you cannot make it all the way up in the social structure. It is a shared responsibility. We need to change our own habits as a society, but we also need support from international regulation organizations that properly address cases of forced mobilization of people because multinationals detect valuable minerals in an area and decide to bribe government authorities to get access to those lands where populations have been living for ancestral times. In the case of Mexico, most of the largest displacement of people occurs in lands that belong to indigenous peoples, because we, as a society, do not see their problems as ours. There's still a clear line that defines who they are and who we are. We are the ones who find communities the way to shift from being one of them to being one of us. Let's go to the last page. You think you achieve that by moving to a larger city, consciously deciding not to use your local language, not wearing your traditional clothes, and of course, detaching yourself from the music that represents your identity, that you grow up with. At the end, you might prefer saying, this mining company is not destroying their land, rather than say, they're destroying my land, or even better say, our land. I believe that it all comes down to empathy, to recognize that the so-called other is part of you and me, and of course, that you and I are part of them. After all, who decides who counts as us and who counts as them? It's time to acknowledge our own bias and privilege. It's time to find ways of acknowledging and embracing those parts of our cultures that connect to our traditional ways of knowing and being in the world. We need to move forward from undermining towards celebrating our identities. If we create empathy among all of us, there will not be a place for separate us and them. It would be us. If those in power want to divide and conquer, if we as humanity move together, it will be possible to find solutions for problems around the world, because your pain will be mine and my happiness will be yours. It's not necessary for you to lose in order for me to win, because I can see in you part of who I am. I can embrace my ancestral ways of knowing, because I know you will not judge me as the one that once was colonized. And I will try to move forward and learn that you are not the former colonizer, because we recognize each other as equals. Maybe, just maybe, one day in a pre-talk concert where an indigenous person shares something about her or his own experience with music, people will not laugh just because an indigenous person acknowledges that she or he has something important to share. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hector. Please write down questions that you may have. We will keep questions at the end of the presentations. We have actually reserved 20 minutes for audience engagement because you were very important in this conversation. So do not forget your questions. And please remember a very important message that Hector had just shared about the need to acknowledge who we are, our multiracial identities, and so forth. The moment he experienced the epiphany about music and the importance of indigenous music. So, now, the video, is it ready?
Shalom. Thank you for inviting me. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you, as I loved being with you 2 years ago in Birmingham, where we pushed through thinking on nonviolence and imagined revolutionary nonviolence. This panel is moving toward a conception of peace, or a peace movement, that includes a critical disability perspective, ensures that the practical aspects of bodily inclusiveness that would allow the participation of all people with disabilities in this organization and in the wider peace and justice movement of which it is a part. But first, I want to talk about what feminism and feminists have brought to the peace movement in redefining the field, making connections, and insisting on an intersectional definition of peace. I invoke Barbara Deming as an elder of our movement, and I want to call her out here and remind you of her perspective. In her book, Revolution in Equilibrium, Barbara presents the metaphor of the two hands of nonviolence. She says, with one hand, we say to one who is angry, or to an oppressor, or to an unjust system, stop what you are doing. I refuse to honor the role you are choosing to play. I refuse to obey you. I refuse to cooperate with your demands. I refuse to build the walls and the bombs. I refuse to pay for the guns. With this hand, I will even interfere with the wrong you are doing. I want to disrupt the easy pattern of your life. But then the advocate of nonviolence raises the other hand. It is raised outstretched, maybe with love and sympathy, maybe not, but always outstretched. With this hand we say, I won't let go of you or cast you out of the human race. I have faith that you can make a better choice than you are making now, and I will be here when you are ready. Like it or not, we are part of one another. And this was a founding document of the feminist peace movement and of suggesting that the personal and the political are integral, they're one, and that the peace movement has to have a much larger perspective that integrates all kinds of levels of life, violence, interaction, the public and the private. And these changes, I think, have led into a number of transformations in our analysis of peace and of justice over many years, and I think it's time for another transformation or another evolution, if you will. The disability movement is significantly indebted to feminism and grows out of feminism, both in terms of the actual relationships between real people, but in terms of the ideas too, the confidence to go ahead and to insist on the intersectionality, to insist that other movements need to include disability as a perspective, not just as an inclusivity or civil rights perspective, but that the ideas of critical disability thinking and movement and politics, and also I think what many of you may know who are participants in resistance movements, is that people with disabilities are at the forefront of radical tactics as they're being developed on behalf of the Medicare for All movement, on healthcare, and on all kinds of issues of access and inclusivity. And so what I want to talk about is really the several parts, I think, of the movement of people with disabilities that I think potentially should feed into the peace movement and redefining peace and justice for this organization, which those of you who are, I think, scholars and academics and activists, all of you should know more about. People don't know about this, and we should. And it's not somebody else's movement, it's all of our movement. And so I want to raise, there's a lot to say, but I want to make 3 points basically, or talk about 3 aspects of this as it relates to the topic here at hand. One is The first is the electrifying actions of people with disabilities and the leading of resistance movements. That had a lot of publicity. People may know that the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Canadian versions of, and other versions of the same thing, civil rights legislation for inclusion and rectifying the tilt and unfairness. Some of the most important civil disobedience has been done in places like Bolivia, where thousands of people walked hundreds of miles in wheelchairs, on crutches, and confronted the government in the town square in 2012 over benefits and civil rights and treatment and prejudice against people with disabilities. This is an action that you should look up and see what they did, what they said, the visuals. It's a very amazing thing. And also it's interesting, they were confronting a socialist government, which needed confronting. And then also the various actions that have happened in this country over AIDS and healthcare, in particular, over access, where people have used their bodies, people with disabilities, in a particularly effective way of climbing and crawling upstairs or into places. And this is an ongoing part of the radical disability movement. And that involves the remaking of attitudes about the body, of physical space, of architecture, of the public world in all kinds of ways. So the challenges are multiple, and really the vision, it breaks out the vision of what it is to be human, and the kind of maybe humanism that we might like to be moving forward here, which is informed by more physicality and ecological perspective, embodied existence as part of nature and part of each other, that we're not discrete individuals. And so people with disabilities, though, suggest that we need a way wider sense of what a human body is, and also of the fragility and vulnerability and mortality that we all share. Part of the antipathy to people with disabilities, or the avoidance, is that people don't want to face their own fallibility, mortality, and vulnerability. And this is a really central theme for feminism, for environmental movements, for peace. And so this is a really central way to illustrate this point, which I think is crucial to developing a vision of peace and a peace movement. And this is something people with disabilities blow out and amplify in a way that has not been done before. A sort of understanding, a visceral understanding of the body, and of a different way of thinking about the body, and also of normality and the latent authoritarianism that's in the idea of the normal. So this is what we want to get rid of, and what we want to challenge. And we want to do it at an intellectual level, theoretically, in the academy with scholarship, but we want to do it politically in the streets. And we want to do it practically in terms of how we put together an organization like the Peace and Justice Studies Association, where there's a lot of work to be done on infrastructure and attitudes and practical changes, if, as has been talked about, a future conference may be on the theme of disability. So all of this is, the aspect of what it means for the organization, the scholarship and critical perspectives, the familiarity with the movement and what the tactics bring, and the fearless militance, really, of people with disabilities, the willingness to use what are fragile and vulnerable bodies. All of our bodies are fragile and vulnerable, but this is more transparently so for people who are recognized as having disabilities, or recognized as having disabilities. So this means, I think it means a lot for everyone. It means a lot in terms of leadership of the movement, in terms of thinking, in terms of theoretical advancements, and in terms of what's necessary to have a conference or a meeting of your organization, or to do anything. And so I think that, everybody here needs to stop, if you do, thinking of disability movement as something separate, but as something that's part of the peace movement. And this is a really critical perspective that is, something that we're just really getting started on here. And I'm really glad that you're doing this and pushing in this direction. It's something new and great. Okay.
Well, we hope that you paid attention to Ynestra King's message. Here is something I remember. We are part of one another. It's time for another transformation. It's time for another revolution. Intersectionality. However strongly we acknowledge that each one of us has multiple identities at any single time, we do. People with disabilities have been at the forefront of the several accessibility movements, including ADA, American with Disabilities Act, and their willingness to use their bodies to lead change. These are very powerful points that she made. Again, please write down questions, because we will have a very rich conversation at the end. So now, being deaf culture, negotiating the hearing world, my brother, scholar, associate provost for student success and academic quality at Gallaudet University, Dr. Thomas Horejes. Your turn.
Thank you. And shall I stay seated at the table because I don't need a microphone, or do you want me to the podium? Okay, I think I'll remain seated. Good evening, everyone. I'm very honored and humbled to be here with you today, especially at the closing plenary, the closing speaker of the panel on the last day. So a number of honors rolled into one. So obviously you can see I'm signing, they call it. I'm using American Sign Language. And I'm going to ask you to look at me as a signer, to see me. Do you see me as a person? As a deaf person? A person who has no voice? Right now, where's the power? I'm going to suggest that the power perhaps in this room is not with me, but with the interpreter. Because you are all the status quo. That's what you've grown up with. Right? You're born with an ideological belief, with a belief system. You've heard and spoken. So naturally it makes sense that you're going to look towards the interpreter because that's where you hear the voice. Right? So already my power has been usurped. My identity as an individual, as a human, has been taken away. So I'm going to challenge you to look at me. Look at me first. I have a doctorate in justice studies. And so yes, I am deaf. I'm a dad of 3 children. Yes, I am her brother. So that is a very powerful message that I want you to walk away with. The power of stigma. How can we start to look within ourselves and see reality before we make assumptions? We are social animals. We must have information. We want to know everything about everything. And for us, if we don't have information, we're paralyzed. We naturally look back to our ideological baggage. We bring up the information of what we know. We use the knowledge that we know to fill the unknown and apply that to the other. And sometimes the dramatic results are a misunderstanding, a misconception. We wind up acting out of roots of oppression. And that is a common experience on a daily matter, on a daily basis. So when you meet someone, be sure that you try to recognize them as a human being for who they are first. Yes, they may have a disability, and that's a challenge for us. They may be deaf. For myself, the challenge is pretty obvious, right? I do not communicate the way the status quo does. I don't need a microphone. Look at this. Mine was turned down since the very beginning. I'm very aware, and I'm sure people are very aware, of Paulo Freire and his pedagogy of the oppressed. He talked about the importance of recognizing relationship between the oppressed and the oppressor. And he said, it's okay to be who you are. And sometimes you can be the oppressed and the oppressor both at the same time. It doesn't matter whether you're oppressed or the oppressor or both. And for me, I am oppressed. But it's important that you work with the oppressors, because we have to reimagine peace. We must work with the oppressor if we wish to accomplish the goal of reimagining peace. The oppressor has nothing to lose. They don't need us, the oppressed. So why would they want to work with us? Unfortunately, the burden is on those who are oppressed to work with the oppressors. We have to learn the language of the majority, to learn their ideologies, to understand their language and their framework of their world. For people with a disability, how things are framed are very powerful. We are, unfortunately, stuck. We are victims of the medical framework. Many of us, probably all of us, are born within a hospital. So we're already born within a medical institution. That system, that framework, that medical industry, shall we call it. They already ascribe certain things. They write the books. They're the scientists. They're the medical professionals, whatever profession they are, the ones who make the decision and the ones who actually decided that I have a disability. I didn't choose that label. They did. They decided that people who are deaf have a disability. For me, being deaf is not a problem. Not for me, anyways. It is for them, though. The system is the problem. Do you know that 95% of children who are born deaf are born to hearing parents? So children who are born deaf, 95 of them have parents who are not deaf or non-deaf, or what we call hearing, because the parents can hear and talk just like you. So many people with a disability are born to parents who are able-bodied, that do not have a disability, much like me. So I was born, my parents were excited, of course, to have a bouncing baby boy. The first words the doctor said to my parent was, sorry, followed by, your child failed the hearing test. So the first message my parents get is an apology from somebody in a white coat, somebody in a position of authority, who tells them your child has failed the hearing test. So I wasn't even an hour old. I was born and I'd already failed my first exam. And then they talk about, your son has a hearing loss. I didn't lose anything. I was born that way. I was born fine. But the doctor made the decision that I had a loss, a hearing loss in this case. So really, my loss is, in fact, my gain. Because for me, it's been a long journey for me to decolonize the value system that is placed on me. I didn't learn sign language initially. I didn't learn it until I was 20. I was not immersed in deaf culture until I went to college when I was 20. I grew up and I was taught to speak. And I can speak. I choose to use American Sign Language. I prefer my sign language. That's my preferred language. But I can speak. I can speak if I have to. If I choose to speak, I feel that I oppress members from within my own deaf community who choose to sign. I think if I speak, I give you a misrepresentation of other deaf people. Because I may be able to speak, other deaf people can't, so you may look down upon them because they don't have the skill that I have as a deaf person. On one level, I am an oppressor, because I do oppress members of the deaf community when I speak. I don't support their values. I don't support what they value in their language when I speak. So back to the medical community, if I may. They taught me to speak. They provided me with hearing aids. I had many friends who have received what's called a cochlear implant. If you're not familiar with that, it's a very, very invasive surgery where they actually open the skull and implant a foreign object within one's brain right directly into the cochlea, and it stimulates the cochlea. And babies have no power to say yes or no to that. Other people have the authority to make that decision for them. So we're talking about legitimizing authority. People who make that decision and take it upon themselves to have the authority to determine the identity of a child and who they will become. So for many parents who can speak, they struggle to understand why the deaf community advocates a sign language over choosing to speak. The deaf community continues to reject the medical model of speech. Just as society continues to, ostracize people who have a disability. What I want you to take with you is the phrase, nothing about us without us. Okay? Nothing about us without us. Hector mentioned, the other people, right? And other is part of the problem, but it's important for us to dialogue. I think when we do, we need to discuss what's absent, who's not in the room with us in this dialogue. We need to recognize that other people have rights to be participants in the discussion. Let me talk about Dr. Ndura. She could have easily presented here at this forum. She works at Gallaudet. She's on the part of the staff, the faculty, but she used her discretion to use her power for PGSA to share that and empower me to be here to present with you. If she had not chosen to share that power, I would not be here. She is an ally. She recognizes that power is power. Everybody has a certain power, and that she, as Dr. Ndura, recognized the validity of nothing about us without us. So she is our ally, and she invited me into this discussion, this dialogue. The access, the inclusive philosophy needs to really be analyzed. What does it mean? We're already privileged by simply being here. Right? Everyone who is here has a position of privilege. So what Dr. Ndura did was change the structure of the power from a horizontal structure to from a vertical structure to a horizontal structure of power. So you have different layers, different divisions of power, and with a horizontal structure, it is shared amongst many. So we need to analyze, where is the power? How can it become horizontalized? Power will always be there. We can't ignore the fact that there's power. Power is always there. We simply have to learn how to use power to take advantage of opportunities to do good. We have to figure out how we can leverage power to effect change. And part of that is the inclusion of forgiveness. Now, for me, as a member of an oppressed group, I struggle, to be honest, to forgive. And I can give you an example today that is extremely powerful. I flew in today to Winnipeg from St. Paul, Minnesota. And I was seated there, waiting, like everybody else for the plane. And then all of a sudden there was an announcement that was vocal, and I didn't hear it, of course, as I was deaf, but then I started to notice people starting to leave the area. I was reading my book, but something nagged at me, and I thought, I don't know, this doesn't seem right. So I went to look for one of the boards that were visual, and I saw a gate change. So then I had to go, obviously, grab my things and move to a different gate. I can't be mad about that. I did actually approach one of the people who made the announcement and let them know, please be aware that sometimes there are deaf people on flights. I was there. They already knew that I was a deaf person because I had checked in. But there was no backup plan to let me know about the gate change. I couldn't be angry with the person. I couldn't blame them. Instead, I took that as an opportunity, an invitation to educate. So bit by bit, we can educate. There's a long way to go, but it has to start. So I got to Winnipeg, got through immigration, showed them my passport, the customs officer started talking to me, and I gestured that I pointed to my ear, I couldn't hear, and they didn't know what to do with me. So I grabbed a pen and paper and started writing to them, and they just froze. They looked like a deer in the headlights, right? Like they just, what do I do? So I just tried to put them at ease, and they asked me what I had come for, whether it was work or pleasure. And I said, no, it's for work. And they said, well, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm the associate provost. And I thought, well, that's not going to make any sense, associate provost. The customs officer doesn't even know what the provost position is in the States. It's not a Canadian thing. So I thought, okay, let me think, well, how else am I going to explain it? And I said, oh, I work for a university in the States. And he says, well, what are you doing? And I says, well, I'm a professor. And he says, okay, well, I gave him my business card, I showed it to him, and he looked at it, and he says, you have a PhD? And I said, yes, I have a PhD. He looked like it was impossible. I don't know if I look too young to have a PhD, or if it's because I'm deaf, or maybe both, I don't know. But it was impossible. I couldn't be mad at the person. Instead, I chose to educate. I said, yes, I work at a university, I have my doctorate, and I tried to reframe his thinking, right? Tried to look at the legitimizing authority that the person had, and have him reframe his understanding of people with a disability, in particular a deaf person. So members of the oppressor group need to become aware that when they see somebody who's from a minority group or from an oppressed group, they instantly perhaps judge us as being angry, spiteful, hateful people, but we're not necessarily angry. It's the system that we're upset with, not the individual. So what we can do instead of taking it personally is to be part of the change, be active in the change. We have a long way to go. Our work is ongoing, minute by minute, day to day, year to year, but it's a beautiful gift. We have this opportunity to effect change. So when we think about people with a disability, when we talk about disability, look at that word, disability. Disability. Already it's framed negatively. And that's okay. We have to take back and reclaim that identity. We have to use queer theory, right? We have to reclaim our identity. Instead of making assumptions about us, be part of the change with us. Ask us what we need. So I think to wrap up, I want to wrap up with a specific framework that I think emphasizes 3 things that are critical to remember. The first one is we must always remain curious. We must inquire. We must ask questions, as Paulo Freire says, right? We must continue to learn. We must continue to ask. We must seek a greater understanding of who the other person is before we force them to understand our frame. We must be also, as he says, be tolerant. We will face a lot of injustice. We will face a lot of discrimination. We must remain ever tolerant. And thirdly, we must love. We must always act and show love. We are one community. This is the sign I'm going to show you right now for community. It requires 2 hands. This is the sign for community. The sign for solidarity is the sign I'm showing you now. You can't break the solidarity. It requires 2 hands for solidarity as well. There is no room for hate. We must always forgive. We can't forgive because they need it. The other needs it. We must forgive because we need peace. I'm reminded of this very sad situation that happened in Dallas. Remember the female police officer who's recently found guilty of shooting an unarmed black man in Dallas in his own apartment. So the criminal justice system, is in the States is allowed to use what's called the castle defense, which means a person who lives in that residence, in that place, is allowed to defend themselves. In this situation, it wasn't even the police officer, it was not her apartment, but she used the castle defense in the criminal justice system in the States, and which was a complete mistake. But I think what is important is for all of us not to focus on that, but to focus on the brother of the victim. He approached the police officer who had shot his brother and he said, "I forgive you." He did it because he's hoping to change or improve the criminal justice system. He wants to remind us of humanity. We are all part of humanity. We are all human. Even people with disabilities, even deaf people. First and foremost, everyone is human. So, as Paulo Freire says, be curious, be tolerant, and love. That is the path to justice. So, I think my time is up, and I'm very glad to have been part of this panel and be with you today. Thank you.
Take 30 minutes, 30 seconds, just seconds, to just take it in, okay? Take it in. How do you feel about what has been shared here? What new truths have you learned? And what more truths do we need to learn in order for peace to be real and inclusive? For true justice to be shared and understood. Wow, my brother Dr. Horejes gave me chills. You see why we are brothers and sisters. Huh? So, this is your time. Be humble, be open, ask questions. There is no questions that cannot be asked. Remember, Dr. Horejes has reminded us to be curious. That's the only way to learn and to improve and to really lead a true movement to peace and justice that includes everyone in the community. Black, brown, white, deaf, hard of hearing, LGBT, all of those intersectional identities. So, this is very good. Now, I don't see microphones in there. You can take mine. Okay. Make sure you please clarify the person to whom you're directing your question or your comment. This is an opportunity for all of us to learn together, to strengthen our peace and justice community. Don't be shy. Okay? So who wants to go first?
I just have a comment, and then any comments from you, but I feel very humble, and I feel like we all have a long way to go to really be able to see and hear and and empathize with each other and to really be open to learn from each other. And there's so much we still need to learn from each other. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
Come up, please.
I once again want to thank the panelists and the moderator of the panel for the insightful contributions they made. And I've had these thoughts with me. I've not organized it, been thinking about it. Sometimes I imagine maybe it's wrong, but it's a reality that I've personally experienced. I don't want to be like Sigmund Freud, who would use his own experiences to make theories, but I feel I can start from there. I'm writing my dissertation about mainstreaming African indigenous wisdom, especially peacemaking methods. And I've been reading a lot about colonization, decolonization, and indigenization. I left Nigeria in 2010 to study in the US, and I told my dad, who had been to Spain for a couple of years and went back to Nigeria, that, Dad, the world is changing, we have to adopt the white man's way. I put it in my native language, Batu, which is literally the white man's way. Then I found myself in the US, and I was in a classroom. And I tried my best to speak good English, to be understood. And each time I spoke in the class, they would be straining their necks, struggling to understand me. And I kept adjusting myself so that they wouldn't have to make extra efforts to understand me. And I kept realizing that I was conditioned and always conditioned and being conditioned. And all of a sudden, with the classes I took, I said, no, I can't ever be an American. No matter how expertise, I grow in some aspects, I can't be. And the consciousness of myself, looking into the mirror, like the first speaker did, and saying, this is who I am, kept growing and growing and growing in me. And when I took a class on indigenous peacemaking methodologies, I got my epiphany. That is what has informed my master's and my PhD research. And each time I go to conferences, I present and I listen to presentations, I think about Africa. And this is the rough thought and idea I was talking about. What I say about Africa generally is, we stood and looked across the Atlantic. What are they doing there so that we can copy? And we don't have that a priori and inward thinking to assume and bring out the best of us. And each time, okay, what are they doing over there? Okay, let's copy it. Oh, come and tell us what's happening over there. And I feel largely part of Africa's problems and conflict experiences are because of this. So instead of looking inward to know what are our problems, what are our potentials, what are the ways we can deal with them, we're like, come tell us about us. And I tell you, in peace and conflict resolution, I personally feel if that trail proceeds, Africa's problems will never be solved, or conflicts will never addressed. Of course, we talk about not bringing handouts or paradigms from outside, but bringing them from the community. But up to now, that conditioning which the second panelists talk about is still there. So it's a rough idea, and I just wanted to say, listening to them today really has made me, this is the first time I shared the idea publicly. I'm not sure whether it's correct or not. Like I said, I don't want to be a Freudian theorist where I look at myself and I make general theory, But just to share with us that really, it's an epiphany listening to this panel. Thank you.
Will you please state your name? That's part of acknowledging who we are.
Oh, my name is Peter Ayambenga.
Peter.
Yeah, I come from Nigeria. I'm working on my dissertation, Peace and Conflict Studies at Athamoro Center, University of Manitoba.
Thank you. And the sister who was the first to share a comment, please state your name. That way everybody knows. Remind us that we are very important, all of us together.
Linda Roth.
Okay? Very good. Thank you. So this is a reminder, when you come forward to share comments and questions, please affirm your identity by stating your name so that we can remember you, that you're standing in this space together with us. Next person, please.
I see fingers are being pointed, but someone has to come forward. No one's coming forward. Someone's coming forward.
Good.
You can walk a little bit slow. I'm just gonna say, for those who are not at the business meeting, in relation to the last conference, the International Peace Research Association is having our next general conference in Kenya in the middle of January 2021. I invite all of you, but especially the last brother, to go there, to come there, to present some of your findings, because talking about indigenous knowledge, especially from an African perspective, is undoubtedly going to be a part of, not the whole of, but a part of that conference. So we'll see you in January 2021.
Hi, I know there are multiple barriers in society and the way our society is structured. A good friend of mine is blind. She talks to me about often computer programs that assume that she's sighted, things like that. So I was wondering if you had suggestions of ways that we could be good allies in being aware of those barriers and supporting the communities to change them.
And what's your name?
Rachel Hoper.
Thank you.
I think that's a fantastic question. And I think what is important, for example, you gave the example of your friend who is blind. This person probably has a strong identity of a blind person. And there may well be a member of the blind community. So the community themselves is aware of barriers, and I'm sure that they can share their collective wisdom, and I'm sure you've learned from your friend's wisdom. But I think the biggest thing is sometimes people who don't want to identify that they have a disability or deny their disability, I think the important piece is that they learn to identify their identity. The blind community is a large community. There are technological barriers. Perhaps your friend who is blind still encounters technological barriers. But it's important for us to be creative and to work with broader communities to reduce those barriers. And to share wisdom, because I'm sure collectively within the community of people who are blind, there's a lot of wisdom there that we can all learn from.
Thank you. Next question and comment.
I just was coming up to say, need to take this moment to recognize that it's 6. Mm-hmm. And we have Michael and Wendy that apparently both have some... Michael, you can't look at me like that. Wendy told me I was supposed to point.
Yes,
but as we call on Michael and Wendy, I would like to take a moment to thank these 3 and those 2 for an extraordinary closing panel and for an extraordinary weekend. Thank you, all of you.
started on Friday, and that seems worlds away in a sense. And we started with several moments of, take that wisdom in. And Elavie, you have done that also within this panel. And I think you have given us, the four of you, many opportunities over the last hour and a half to think, again, wisdom has come to us in many forms. And so, on behalf of PJSA for 2019, we'd like to thank you for the reflections, the provocations that you brought to us as a way to close and to spring us forward to thinking about the next one. And so, from one of our committee members from the Canadian Civilian Peace Service, we are leaving you with a Canadian book, Stories of Peace, one for each of you. So thank you so much.
Elavie and I were both this close to actually purchasing a copy, so it's very good that you know.
Wow!
Yeah,
I can tell Evelyn on this response to their book. So, Michael, I think as we talked about, you're having the final word.
Okay, so thanks everyone for joining with us. I always say when we have these conference committees every year, we have like 101 roles, that the role I try to take the least at this is speaking in front of large groups, not because it makes me uncomfortable, it's like what we do for a living, but my voice is the voice so often of PJSA, like the electronic voice, like I've emailed probably literally every single person in this room, or I've received your email and I'm the one who responded. So, I don't have anything formal or theoretical or deep or meaningful. I'm going to be the logistics person who's just taking on my administrative role. So part of that is to thank folks for coming. I realize that doing 3 days of conference work for 8 hours a day is draining and challenging. It's nice to see people alert and engaged, and I really appreciate that. And I also want to announce what we're doing next year for those who are engaged with the association. After nearly a year of conversation between myself and some counterparts, we have secured the framework for an initiative. I wouldn't say it's something we plan to do frequently, but it's something that we're trying next year. And next year we are doing a concurrent, we can call it joint, we can call it shared conference with the Association for Conflict Resolution. For those who don't know, the Association for Conflict Resolution, or ACR, is it's an association for conflict resolution, but it's based around practitioners, so lawyers, mediators, arbitrators. I hope I'm giving that a fair representation. It tends to be within a shared ethic, maybe with a slightly or vastly different politic from some of the folks who are here. And so we're very excited to try to combine this notion of PJSA as the kind of activist practitioners and theorists, with ACR as more on the practitioner and professional realm. So we're trying to think of it as two conferences in one. There will be shared sessions, there will be separate sessions. It's an attempt for us to see how and if these two communities and associations fit well together. With that, it brings some challenges. For example, bringing our typical 400 or 500 people with ACR's typical 400 or 500 people means that no university will host us. I know that because I've met with many university leaders, and they're happy to host us for $40,000 to $50,000 fees. We don't have $40,000 to $50,000 to pay to rent a room, so we will be meeting for, I believe, probably the first time ever, but certainly the first time since I worked with PJSA, at a hotel, which is what swanky professional organizations do. This is what other organizations do. So I want to say two things. One is that this doesn't mean that that's what PJSA is becoming. We are not moving to PJSA sponsored by Hilton, but it does mean that next year we will be in a hotel. We are also meeting in a place that I've often jested about and have my own reservations about. We're meeting in Orlando, Florida, just a few weeks prior to the US elections, which I think will make for a really interesting and largely contentious physical space. So we are meeting there September 23rd to 25th, so it's really like 2 weeks before the elections. and we would strongly encourage you to attend. I think it's going to be a very challenging space for us to be in. The year after, so that would be 2021, we'll go back to our more traditional university-based close meeting, and we will be somewhere in Wisconsin. We are being hosted by a Peace Collaborative out of Wisconsin. So I would welcome you to attend both our meeting next year in Orlando as well as the meeting the year after in Wisconsin. If you have concerns, questions, or feedback about what we should think about when A, hosting with a large association that's very different, and B, hosting at a Floridian hotel, I am more than happy to hear those. Certainly issues of accessibility are going to be prime in our concern because they have a radically different politic than we do. And so I think that those will allow us to highlight some of those issues. So that's my administrative hat. Outside of that, I want to thank folks for coming. It's always a pleasure to put these conferences on. It takes the work of many people who have been thanked many times. I get thanked probably the most, but that's silly because this is really spread around to a lot of people who have done a lot of really big, taken on a lot of really big roles here. So I thank you. I will be around, Wendy will be around, many other people who have helped put this together. If you want to say thank you to people, it's always appreciated. But we really thank you for coming and for supporting the association. Thank you guys.